My mother-in-law brought up my husband's ex at a family dinner, saying she's prettier than me, and then went on to criticize everything I do, making me feel like I'm not enough. I knew that family dinners with my husband's side of the family were never going to be easy, but I never expected it to go this far. It was a typical Sunday evening when we arrived at his mother's house, the aroma of her famous lasagna filling the air. The table was set, and everyone was already there, his father, his siblings, and his grandmother. The usual crowd. I tried to smile and settle in, but there was always an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't quite shake. His family had never really warmed to me, especially his mother. I'd always felt like an outsider, as if I could never quite measure up to the image she had in her head of what her son's wife should be. But this dinner was different. It started out as it usually did, small talk, laughter, the clinking of silverware. But as the evening went on, something shifted. It started with a simple comment, one that should have been a passing remark. His mother, always keen to steer the conversation, casually mentioned my husband's ex-wife, Karen. I'd heard of her before. She and my husband had been married for several years before we met. Their relationship had ended amicably, or so I thought, but the way his mother talked about her made it clear there was something more beneath the surface. I was just saying the other day, she began, with that same condescending tone she always used, how beautiful Karen always looked at family gatherings. She really had a natural elegance about her, don't you think? The room went silent for a moment, the air thick with the tension I'd felt creeping in for months. I forced a smile, trying to keep the conversation light. I'm sure she did, I said, trying to mask the discomfort building inside me. But then it came, her words, dripping with judgment. Well, she was always so much prettier than you, dear. It's not that you aren't lovely, of course, but Karen had that effortless beauty. It was just different. The sting of her words hit me harder than I expected. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to speak up, to change the subject, but everyone stayed silent. My husband, who had been chatting with his brother moments earlier, seemed to have gone mute. It was as if they all expected me to just accept this comparison between me and his ex-wife. I wanted to scream. I wanted to defend myself, to say something about how hurtful and unnecessary her comment was, but the words caught in my throat. The last thing I wanted was to make a scene at a family dinner. So, I swallowed my pride and tried to smile, pretending like her words didn't bother me. But they did. They absolutely did. As the evening wore on, her subtle criticisms didn't stop. It was as if she had opened a door to her hidden judgments, and now she couldn't resist walking through it. She went on to talk about how Karen had always been so organized and put together, comparing my own way of managing the household to hers. You know, Karen always kept everything spotless. She made sure the laundry was done, the house was pristine, and dinner was on the table right on time. I could feel the heat rising in my face. The pressure in my chest was unbearable, and I found myself gripping the edge of my seat, trying to keep my composure. I knew she wasn't just making casual observations, she was making sure I knew that I wasn't good enough. That I could never measure up to the woman who had been her perfect daughter-in-law in her eyes. And then it hit me, this wasn't just about Karen. This was about me. About how, no matter what I did, I would never be able to win her approval. She wasn't just comparing me to Karen, she was reminding me that I would always be in her shadow. I glanced at my husband, hoping for some kind of support, but he just sat there, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. He'd never stood up for me when his mother crossed the line. He never seemed to notice how much her comments hurt me. It was in that moment, as his mother continued her subtle jabs, that I realized I could no longer stay silent. I had to do something. But what? How could I possibly confront her without causing a scene? The evening dragged on, and by the time we left, I was emotionally exhausted. The words she had spoken haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the way I was being treated. I knew I needed to talk to my husband about it, but I didn't know where to begin. Would he understand? Would he finally see how hurtful his mother's words were? Or would I once again be left to fend for myself in a family that seemed to have no room for me? That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to stop replaying the dinner in my mind. My heart was heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. His mother's words echoed in my ears, "She's prettier than you." Karen was always so organized. The comparisons were so subtle, but they stung in ways I couldn't ignore. I couldn't help but wonder, was this how it had always been? Had I been so blinded by my love for my husband that I hadn't noticed the way his family treated me? I had always known that his mother had a special place in her heart for Karen, but I had never imagined it would go this far. I had always assumed that, over time, she would come to accept me. After all, I was the one her son had chosen. I had always been polite, respectful, and kind to her. But none of that seemed to matter. I wasn't her idea of what her son should have. It wasn't just that she compared me to Karen, though that was painful enough, it was the way she undermined everything I did. The way she made me feel small, as if nothing I did was ever good enough. She didn't just comment on my looks, she made me feel like I wasn't worthy of my place in her son's life. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern. At every family gathering, she found a way to bring up Karen, comparing her to me in the most casual way. "Oh, Karen used to make the best desserts," she'd say with a smile, and everything she baked was always from scratch. Not like some people who take shortcuts. Or, Karen always had the best taste in home decor. Her house was always magazine-worthy. I felt like I was living in a constant shadow of someone I had never even met. And the worst part? My husband never said anything. He didn't defend me. He didn't even acknowledge the hurt in my eyes. I tried to talk to him about it one night, after another dinner where his mother had made yet another comparison. "Why don't you say something to her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, afraid of sounding too fragile. "Why don't you stand up for me?" He looked at me, his face filled with confusion. "What do you mean?" "She's just making conversation. She doesn't mean anything by it." But that wasn't true. She meant something by it. It was in the way she spoke, the tone in her voice, the way her words always seemed to find their way under my skin. "She's always comparing me to Karen," I said, my voice trembling. "It's not just innocent conversation. She's constantly making me feel like I'm not enough." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what you want me to do. She's my mom, and she's just being herself." His words stung, but I kept my composure. I couldn't understand why he couldn't see it. Why couldn't he see that his mother's subtle digs were breaking me down, bit by bit? Why couldn't he understand that his silence was just as painful as her words? It wasn't just about the comparisons anymore. It was about feeling invisible. Every time she spoke about Karen, every time she compared us, it felt like she was erasing me from the picture. As if I was just a placeholder, not truly his wife in her eyes. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just a simple case of a mother-in-law being difficult. This was something deeper. This was about my place in his family, my worth in his eyes, and whether or not I would ever be able to break free from the constant shadow of his past. And what hurt the most was that, even though my husband claimed to love me, he never saw how much his mother's words were affecting me. He didn't understand that it wasn't just a matter of hurt feelings, it was about the constant undermining, the constant comparisons, the feeling that no matter what I did, I would never be good enough for his family. One evening, after yet another uncomfortable dinner, I sat in the car, staring out the window, feeling completely drained. My husband was in the house, talking to his family, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep living in a relationship where I felt invisible, where my worth was constantly being questioned by the people who should have been supporting me. I had to find a way to stand up for myself. I couldn't keep letting her chip away at my confidence, and I couldn't keep hoping that my husband would suddenly wake up and realize what was happening. I had to take control of the situation. But how? The tension in our home had become unbearable. Every time I walked into a family gathering, I could feel the weight of his mother's expectations pressing down on me. I was never going to be enough. No matter how hard I tried, I would never fit the mold she had created in her mind of what her son's wife should be. The breaking point came one evening when I finally reached my limit. We had been invited to another family dinner, and I knew what to expect: another round of comparisons, another round of subtle jabs. But this time, something inside me snapped. It started when his mother, in the middle of discussing the upcoming holidays, casually mentioned Karen's perfect Christmas traditions. "Karen always made Christmas so magical," she said with a wistful sigh. "Everything was perfect, from the decorations to the meals. She really knew how to create a warm, loving atmosphere." I felt the familiar knot in my stomach tighten, but this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I couldn't. "Are you saying I'm not capable of making Christmas special?" I asked, my voice trembling but firm. His mother looked at me, surprised by my directness. "Oh, no, of course not. It's just that Karen had such a natural talent for those things." I felt my blood boil. It wasn't just the comment about Karen, it was the fact that she couldn't see me for who I was. She only saw me as a comparison to someone else. I turned to my husband, hoping he would finally speak up, but once again, he remained silent, his eyes avoiding mine. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks: he wasn't going to defend me. He wasn't going to stand up to his mother. That was when I knew I would never be able to please her. And more importantly, I wasn't sure I could keep living in a marriage where I felt like I was constantly fighting for validation that would never come. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep living in a marriage where I felt invisible, where my worth was measured by someone else's standards. It wasn't just about the comparisons anymore, it was about the way I was being made to feel small, insignificant, and never good enough. That night, after yet another dinner filled with subtle digs and uncomfortable silences, I made a decision. I wasn't going to allow myself to be the punching bag of his family's expectations any longer. I sat my husband down when we got home. The silence between us was thick, and I could feel the tension in the air, but I knew this was a conversation that needed to happen. "Why don't you ever stand up for me?" I asked, my voice quiet but unwavering. "Why do you let your mother treat me this way?" He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what you want me to say. She's just like that. She doesn't mean anything by it." "But she does mean it," I replied, my voice trembling with frustration. "She's been comparing me to Karen, criticizing everything I do, and you've never said a word. You've never defended me." I paused, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm done. I'm done trying to earn her approval. I'm done trying to be someone I'm not just to fit into her perfect image of what I should be. I deserve more than that. For the first time, I saw a flicker of realization in his eyes. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, it wasn't the response I expected. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft. "I didn't realize how much this was affecting you." The apology felt hollow, and I knew in that moment that nothing would ever change. His mother would always be his priority, and I would always be second. I had spent so long hoping he would choose me, but it was clear that he never would. "I can't keep living like this," I said, standing up. "I need to take care of myself. I can't keep fighting for a place in a family that doesn't want me." I packed my things quietly, the weight of the decision settling in. When I walked out the door, it felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I was finally free. Free from the constant comparisons, free from the expectation that I would always fall short. As I drove away, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. I had made the hardest decision of my life, but it was the right one. I had chosen myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was enough.